While I'm sorting this out, you can help me with a sound test in there.
Yeah, it's sounding okay. I'm Justin Ecock. Hello. I have...
That's good, because my voice will be lower than yours.
Yes, of course it will. Because I'm Justin Ecock. I talk like this all the time.
Let's try calling. Oh,
his name is Jim, right?
Space. The thing we have to cross. These are the voyages of the U.S.S. Horizon. Its ongoing mission. To seek out new life, to swear it was on stun the whole time, and to boldly claim we can fix it.
Hello there, Terrible Warrior listeners. We usually say terrible listeners, and I keep feeling bad about that whenever I say terrible listeners, and it's just a bad branding thing, I think, that we keep putting you down every time we say hello. I'm Justin Ecock, and we just wrapped up the Star Trek Adventures arc SE-119, Convoy SE-119, and I'm here in the studio with Joshua
Barbeau, actor who plays Commander Haddock in the game.
Yeah. Is Josh too familiar? Should I be saying Joshua?
I prefer to go by Joshua, but that's
that's fine. That's cool.
Just my idiosyncrasies.
Yeah, no, I totally respect that, and it'll be billed as Joshua from now on. And we are doing something a little differently. We've done interviews on the show with other developers from different publishers, but we've never, I think, done an interview with the writer of the game immediately after we've played it, which is kind of fun and neat and means we can get in without having to explain anything, because chances are if you're listening to this on the Star Trek Adventures playlist, you've already sat through 12 hours of Star Trek Adventures, so we don't need to catch you up to speed. And if you're listening to this and you haven't listened to the campaign, spoilers, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to get into the details of what happened in our story. So if you don't mind that, then allow me to introduce to you our guest for today's mini episode. He's written for developers like White Wolf and Decipher. He's been a freelance writer and published under Star Trek titles. I know Josh has got some questions about those books coming up. And more recently, joined on Modiphius' writing team. He's helping to spearhead the Living campaign. He wrote Convoy SE-119, which we just played. We are really happy to have you here. Jim Johnson, thank you for joining the table here at the Terrible Warriors.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me aboard.
How did you get with Modiphius? I know you've been a lifelong fan of Star Trek, so I guess catch us up to speed on how you got to being the guy we're talking to tonight.
So basically, Jason Dural is the line manager for the Conan game that Modiphius produces. So Jason and I go way, way back. We were both playtest coordinators and freelance writers on Decipher's Lord of the Rings role-playing game back in, I guess it was 2001, 2002, somewhere right around there. And so we met each other then and did a lot of work together, doing the playtest coordination and some freelance writing, and stayed in touch over the years after, Decipher no longer did business and moved on to different things. And he was working on the Conan game. And when he found out that Modiphius had secured the license to do the Star Trek role-playing game, he got in touch with me and said, "Hey, I know you love Star Trek, so get in touch with Modiphius and see if you can get involved." And just went from there. I got involved at the very, very early stages of the Star Trek development, and was able to leverage my fairly extensive lifelong expertise with Star Trek, and my experience as a writer, freelance writer, and just dove in with both feet, basically.
That is really cool. And
supremely exciting.
Yeah.
We've been doing Terrible Warriors for over 5 years now. And since we started, and since I came onto the show, I've wanted to play a Star Trek game. But of course, 5 years ago, there was no Star Trek role-playing game. There was one that was published.
But it wasn't very...
And that's what I heard from everyone. It's just garbage. And I would see it up on the bookstore shelf, and I wouldn't even go near it because so many friends had warned me away from it. And I had looked at what other systems we were playing that could work. Maybe something like the Fate system or something else out there that allowed you to write in, because it's not just straight up a combat. You can't just do a combat simulator with Star Trek, and you can't just do Powered by the Apocalypse story only, because there are some, actual mechanics that have to work into a Star Trek game because of the technology. Right. And then right around the time where I was just going to give up and just homebrew my own on the show and just completely bash something together, Modiphius announces the Star Trek Adventures game, and I'm just like, we're saved. We can play this. It's going to be great.
Nice.
The very first time we played the game on the show, it was a campaign I wrote. We played through it, and it was a mess. And then from there, we jumped on to playing along with the living campaign. A few months delayed, and here we are now, just finishing Convoy SE 119 with our commander's unorthodox way of handling a crippled Klingon ship.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I wanted to ask you. You've written these games, and they've been out in the wild now. I don't know how long. SE has been out since, I think, November was the release. Have you heard much feedback from that game? And what's it like having written a story where you don't have control over what happens once other people get their hands on it?
Let's see. All right. So I think Convoy actually came out maybe in August or September. I think a different one came out in November. I don't remember, though, because I don't have the release dates in front of me. But I think Convoy's been out for a little while.
You're most likely correct. I don't know when I am half the time.
No, that's okay. So I troll most of the Star Trek Adventures boards that are out there. There's a Google Plus group and a Reddit group and a couple of Facebook groups and RPG.net. So I keep an eye, I keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on with Star Trek Adventures in the communities. And I haven't gotten a huge amount of feedback yet, but in general, the stuff I've heard about this particular adventure has been positive, which is always nice to hear. There's been some negative comments too, which is great because that gives me some constructive feedback to build into the next one. I think one of the challenges, though, is that the living campaign is an ongoing story. So, like, a couple of the concerns I've heard about Convoy SE119 is that parts of it feel incomplete and there's some question marks that it leaves. And that's entirely intentional because there's a bigger story we're telling, and we haven't revealed all the secrets yet. So as the living campaign continues to grow, you'll start to see some of the pieces coming together, and hopefully that'll allay some of the concerns that people have had about it. But like I said, overall, the feedback has been really positive, which is great because I've been a Star Trek gamer for 26, 27 years. And like you, have had challenges where we've had to create our own homebrew because there just weren't a lot of systems out there. We played FASA and we played Decipher and we played the Last Unicorn games, and they were all good games, but none of them really quite did what we wanted them to do. There was always a little bit of house ruling, which I guess is true for most role-playing games. But I tell you, when Modiphius came along and we started developing this rule set, I was really impressed with it. I think Nathan Dowdle did a fantastic job adapting the 2D20 system. So I got to just name drop him because I think he did a fantastic job on the system. But going on to your question, as a writer, so I write fiction and I also write RPG material. And it's always great to write an RPG adventure and release it out to the wild because I love to hear what players and GMs do to it and how they change it and modify it. Because I know, I've been a gamer long enough to know that any published adventure never survives contact with the players. Something's always going to be different.
Oh, if it doesn't go off the rails, then they just weren't having fun.
Yeah, exactly. And I love hearing people, who say, we did this and this and this, and we went off in this direction. And I look at that and I'm like, well, that's awesome because I totally didn't intend that to happen. But I love that it did because that means that you guys are having fun with it and doing stuff and coming up with solutions and options that, one person can't come up with. When you get a group of people together, it's always more dynamic than one person sitting at the computer.
Oh, and as the rest of the crew was looking at Joshua's character and his solutions in horror, we'll probably have to deal with that in a court-martial in a follow-up series.
I beamed over to the Klingon ship, which was boarded by aliens, and I pulled an FTL and opened an airlock to suck
Everyone
them
can
into
go outside
space.
now. And,
wow.
And we're and the captain's back on board our ship, going, "Oh, that's a lot of bodies. let's bring him back, and we'll sort this all back at the station." I mean, to be fair, you were in a do or die situation, and that was an extreme solution. But it's one of those fun things I found now playing 3 stories in Star Trek Adventures. There is no given solution. When we're playing Shadowrun or D&D or West End Star Wars, which we did a lot of a few years ago, usually you come up to a place and the GM just says, roll this, or here's your, this is what you're going to roll for your blaster, this is what you're going to do to pick a lock, and it's always just a set move. Whereas I can say something as simple as a Klingon is standing in your way, and you have 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 options to you, depending on how you want to combine those stats. And it's been really interesting as a GM to be able to just say, what do you want to do? Here's your problem, and let their characters decide their solution based on their own backgrounds. How does that work when you're writing a scenario that isn't going to have such a cut and dry, well, you just need to blow up this temple and it's going to be over?
Yeah, well, the challenge is, especially for Star Trek, because we're trying to tell, not so much for the Living Campaign, but in general, we're trying to tell a complete story so that any Star Trek adventure feels like a Star Trek episode, right, where it has a beginning, middle, and end, kind of the traditional 3-act structure. But what you have to do is you have to be, like, as a writer, you have to be flexible, because you just put the players on a rail and go from beginning to end, because then that's, there's not a lot of fun in that necessarily, because you don't want them to think that they don't have some agency in what they're doing. And so you kind of you have to write it in such a way that you're saying, okay, game master, here's kind of the suggested way that this should flow. But, if your players do something crazy or something cool, then, it's up to the GM to kind of change it and modify it and go with it. So, like, if they decide to blow up the Klingon ship and kill Captain Nakul, well, you know what? Do it and tell us how you did it in the survey afterwards, and have fun with it, because ultimately, the Living Campaign is like our version, but every game group out there is going to have their own kind of like alternate reality where they do their own thing, and every Living Campaign is going to be a little bit different, which is great. But yes, as a writer,
their own
you really
mirror
kind of have
universe.
It's like that Worf episode with the million different parallel realities.
Oh yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
They're all canon now in the Star Trek multiverse.
Yep, that's right.
We went through a whole phase last year on Terrible Warriors where we just basically played Powered by Apocalypse games. All of these Powered by Apocalypse games, which are incredibly light on rules and very heavy on pushing for story inputs from the players. This was after moving away from much more traditional RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons and Shadowrun, which are incredibly heavy on rules and simulating every bit of the combat. And Star Trek's Adventures has got this weird balance between allowing both of those. Sounds like from your own play history, you're more of the traditional RPG background, like most of us. What do you think of those story-based RPGs, and how the role-playing community is pivoting between these two styles of gameplay right now?
Well, I will say that I'm actually more of a narrativist gamer than a simulationist. I like D&D, and I like playing it and doing the grind and the combat and the XP gathering and all that stuff. But I really prefer more storytelling oriented games. What I don't love so much are the games that really kind of push the players into coming up with something creative, because not all players are improv actors necessarily, and they can't always come up with stuff off the top of their head. So I like games like Fantasy Flight, Star Wars game, where the narrative dice kind of help you along. And also Pendragon. I played a lot of Pendragon and love it, because the Pendragon characters have a set of traits, and sometimes if something comes up, that your character rolls on a trait, and they might do something that you don't want them to do, just because their character, the nature of their character is such that they may not be heroic if there's something coming up, right? So I love having some storytelling elements to the mechanics that really help me do more role playing and storytelling than actually just like rolling dice and bashing away at stuff. And I found that the Star Trek game, really, you can do both, or you can do either with it pretty well. And I'll be honest, I don't use all the rules in the Star Trek Adventures rule set, because I'm really more focused on the narrative and the storytelling, and don't really want to get into the weeds sometimes during a game session that I'm running or even playing.
In our game, I think the only time these guys got any hit point damage or stress damage was at the beginning when they went to the Klingon bar on the render station, and they were dared to drink some fire wine as like some hazing ritual. That's the only time they took any damage. You took it. So roll a bunch of effect dice, and just you've just poured down molten sugar basically down your throats. But the Klingons respect you now. But when we actually got into the combat, part of it is the podcast is only an hour per episode, so we're playing a lot more fast and loose with the rules. So those pirate ships were just popping out of the sky like popcorn.
Yeah.
And I wasn't worried too much about the exact damage that was going on.
That made it more fun
But exactly,
too.
right?
You don't want it to be bogged
Also, these
down.
jokers picked a Galaxy-class ship, so they get to have that kind of overpower in a scene like that. And I always find the collaborative story playing more rewarding at the end when we can all laugh about what just happened. But we've played Pendragon, and I know exactly what you're talking about with those instant conflicts that come out of the different attributes that the players start off with. And we played Star Wars just last December with our Papers, Please Empires game. It got real dark. But same deal, if you're not an improv actor, you can just look at the dice for prompts.
Some games also really help that along. Like we played Our Last Best Hope, which I found really helped generate story with those cards that you give out at the start of the game.
Yeah, well, I mean, Our Last Best Hope, we're playing that next month, and there's almost no dice except at the end of any scene, and it's very much, you play out a whole scene. It's from the same people who made Questlandia and Norlandia. But Star Trek Adventures, we just keep coming back to it. We're committed now. We've got our crew. We've started this story arc, and we have to see really what happens to Haddock's career. I think it's done. I think you're done. You're going to be demoted to lieutenant with this kind of attitude.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
One of the interesting bits that I was reading about, and I saw you sent out a tweet. Star Trek was famous as a TV show with even the original series, I believe, up to Next Generation and I think up to the end of Enterprise. They would take open solicitations for scripts. You could send in screenplays to Star Trek, and there's a handful of great examples, like Measure of a Man was one of those that was just handed in by an LA lawyer who put it in, and there was a writer's strike that year, and they're like, well, we'll take this script, we'll make a show out of it. And one of the best episodes of Star Trek came out of that. And in the grand tradition of unsolicited script submissions, I understand Modiphius is keeping that up with Star Trek Adventures in terms of submitting and pitching ideas for future stories.
Yes, absolutely. The scripts for a while with Next Gen and DS9, and I think even Voyager for a while, they had an open policy where they would take pitches from fans, and I think Ronald D. Moore got his start that way too. I think he pitched a spec script and then got in as a writer, and then of course his career continued on. But for a while there, Simon and Schuster, the pocketbooks, they have the license to do Star Trek fiction. For 10 years, they ran a contest, a short story contest called Strange New Worlds, where they were taking open solicitations from fans all around the country to submit a professional quality short story, and a panel of judges would judge it and get the best stories would get published in an anthology. And actually, I think they just did that again last year, too, for the 50th anniversary. But so in that tradition, Modiphius has an open call for adventure pitches. So anybody who wants to write an adventure for Star Trek Adventures, for Star Trek, can send pitches to me. And, if they're workable, I'll commission it, and we'll work on it and make it a standalone adventure. And I did some research with my friends in the Star Trek writing world, and I'm pretty confident, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty confident that Modiphius is the only Star Trek licensor right now that is accepting unsolicited pitches from writers where you don't need an agent. Like all the nonfiction and the fiction, you need an agent really to kind of get in the door. And Modiphius is open to anybody and everyone who wants to pitch an idea to us. Actually,
that's a good segue to a question that I had for you.
Yeah.
So I'm aware that there's a lot of Pocketbooks owns the rights to doing Star Trek fiction in like novels and stuff, and Modiphius owns the rights for the role playing game. I know with Pocketbooks they have a long list of things that your Star Trek story cannot be if you're interested in submitting for them. And I know this because I'm writing a Star Trek novel, but that's neither here nor there.
Oh, well, look at you.
I was wondering if Modiphius has a similar list of things that, okay, if you're writing a Star Trek Adventures game, do you have limitations on what you can write about?
No, not that I'm aware of. So Sam Webb is the line manager, and I'm his. If he's the captain, I'm the executive officer. I haven't heard anybody say anything of things that we can or can't do. We don't have a license to do anything with Star Trek Discovery yet, mostly because it's too new, and they haven't released a RPG license for it yet, as far as I know. That's just speculation, but I'm pretty confident that's where it is. But pretty much anything goes. I mean, we're in pretty regular contact with the CBS Studios folks that approve our manuscripts. And to the best of my knowledge, we haven't had anything kicked back to say, no, you can't do this, or no, you shouldn't do this. And I think part of that is because everybody who's working on the game really knows Star Trek and knows, kind of gets the concept. And we're not going to pitch some crazy idea about like all the senior staff getting high on drugs and going to do something terrible, right?
I mean, it's just
if you know Star Trek, you know what you can get away with and what you can't get away with for the most part. And I think CBS trusts us to not, make a horrible black mark on their intellectual property. So I think as far as I know, we don't have any restrictions. To that end, though, we're not really focusing on any of the canon characters, right? We're creating adventures for the players and the game masters to bring their own characters and ships into the universe. So I think if there was potential of us stepping on toes, I'm sure CBS would let us know. But so far, we haven't had any issues with that.
Well, I mean, now I just want to make our own Deep Space Deadline canon, don't I? So
yes, of course.
I actually really love that you set it in the year that you did. Every time I tell my friends about this game, they're immediately either original series or Next Generation. They immediately pick a camp, and they've got to know, well, when is it happening? Is it happening after Voyager? Is it happening before the Next Generation? And I said, well, 2371. We got the exact year there, and it's a really cool time for telling stories. It's after the Enterprise, we had the Enterprise D crash in our first adventure because it happens roughly at right in that year, and I had been teasing them through the whole game. If anything gets into trouble, you can always call the Enterprise for help, and if they were ever going to do that, it would be like the Enterprise is a little busy right now, crashing into whatever planet.
Nimbus 3.
It wasn't Nimbus 3. It was like Armagosa Station was where it started, and where did it end? What was the planet that they crashed on? Memory Alpha.
Question.
And but anyway, the whole point was, oh, you're looking for the Enterprise? Well, that's funny because Starfleet Command is asking for all ships to immediately fly to help the Enterprise, who's just crashed on a planet. And so now we're in this point where there's no flagship at the end of the Federation. Voyager is gone missing, and no one knows what's going on there. And Deep Space Nine is in a weird, are we about to go into war? So there's this real tension surrounding everything that's going on, and our crew and in these stories, and I've even picked up on it in the Convoy episode, and just the whole idea of this joint task force to try and hold whatever piece we have together. It's great for telling a nice, rich role-playing game where this is our chance to rise up, and if we really blow the socks off of Command, we could be the next big stars, because all the other stars are either too busy dealing with the wormhole or they currently don't have a ship right now, and Worf is looking for a job. And we're right here at the moment to stand in a spotlight. I mean, am I following the right train of thought here where that's the year we've picked for a reason?
Yeah, man, you're right on. And so we set that up because there's, like you said, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the Next Gen era. And the Living Campaign, the TNG part of the Living Campaign starts right there in 2371. And what I love about it is because I love DS9 so much as a TV series and a storytelling venue, that the Living Campaign is really tied right into that, because we are carrying the Living Campaign is advancing in timeline from adventure to adventure. So we are tying in elements of things that happen in DS9 and Voyager and Next Gen and the movies and stuff, and we're able to tie all that into the ongoing campaign. And you're going to start seeing more references. Like I threw in a couple references into Convoy about Vedic Brile getting killed and the Cardassians and the Bajorans signing a peace treaty.
That worked out so well for us. Obviously, there's no reason you would ever know this. Our science officer was a Bajoran who, in the lifespan creation process, had a religious background. One of his father is like real close with whatever their Vedics would have been on their refugee world. And so he couldn't make it to our recording when we did Convoy. And there is Vedic Barile just like, oh, well, he's a period of mourning. He's had to go off to Bajor to be with his family for this mourning period. And now there's all this other suspicion of like, what the hell's going to happen to all of the Bajorans who are enlisted in Starfleet now that they've signed this peace treaty? And our Bajoran isn't there for that story. And that was just a fluke of schedules, but it worked out really well. And it warms my nerdy heart to see these star dates and be able to know exactly, like, anchored somewhere in that timeline, but so far removed from it out in the Shackleton Expanse that we're able to, stretch our legs and have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, and that's all. It's all completely intentional. So you're going to see a lot more canon references dropping into the Living campaign, but you're also going to see the meta plot that we're developing in the Living campaign start to rear its head in the upcoming adventures, because we want to make sure that the players that are in the Shackleton Expanse stay there and that they're involved in their own big storyline. So while you've got Cisco and everybody on DS9 is around the wormhole dealing with the Dominion incursion, and then you got the next gen crew kind of chilling out until the Sovereign class is finished. This is a chance for the players and the GMs to really shine and create their own mark on the universe in the Shackleton Expanse, and that's really I love working on it because we can tie in all that canon stuff and drop in all the nerdy references that fans like us just eat up when we see it in a product.
Well, and you can see it on the map. You've intentionally set us on the exact opposite side of the map from where all the TV action is happening. So we would have to go way out of our way to cross paths with something we've seen on screen.
Yeah,
it's really cool because even though we're so far removed, the ripples of what's happening over there is affecting us over here, and you like to think that the ripples of what we're doing is affecting them.
Yeah,
but
I got the sense of there's this dread doom where we know in a way inevitably war is going to come, and we're all trying to stop it from happening, but it's like putting our fingers into a dam that's already broken. And as players who are fans of Star Trek, which at our table not everyone is. Our captain...
I'm the biggest Star Trek fan.
The guy I made our captain has never watched Star Trek before at all. So he's constantly having to refer to the computer going, "Computer, what is the Prime Directive? Can I torture this prisoner? No? Okay." And yet, as a GM, I know we're heading in that direction, but as characters, we're all hoping that, well, if we do a real good job with the Klingons here, this might all be worth it and we can stop this from happening. And it's a lot of... It's really I'm loving it. I can't. There's a reason why we keep coming back to play it. And to listeners who aren't fans of Star Trek, you can just stuff it because this is one of the best experiences I've had on the podcast in 5 years of running it. Is this story where we've got these characters that we've created that we're playing in a world that everyone else is enjoying, and it's just so good.
How long does it take you to write these adventures, and how much longer from when you write them do they actually see release?
So the Living Campaign adventures are a little bit different than the standalone adventures I'm also responsible for. So the Living Campaign adventures, for me as a writer, it only took me, I think, 2.5 weeks to outline and write Convoy SE-119. Some of the other writers that are in the stable, they work about the same speed, maybe a little faster. Like Aaron Palea, who wrote Tug of War, he writes really quick, which is awesome. But it usually takes about a month to write it, edit it, and then we have to send it off to CBS for approvals, which takes anywhere from a couple weeks to a month, depending on how busy they are, because they're in charge of everything Star Trek, not just the RPG. And then it goes into layout and then it's delivered. So there's a bit of a lag. We are trying to get more speedy on our releases. I think originally we had wanted to do once a month, but just the reality of production slowed that down a little bit. So I think for season 2, we're going to try to do really more regular releases and be on top of it. But I say there's it probably takes about 2 to 3 months to develop it and then get it out the door. But the writing team are constantly behind the scenes on our chat group talking about plot lines and stories and NPCs and things that we can do and how things are all going to fall together. Because I don't know if you know, but the Living Campaign, there's actually two campaigns.
Yes,
there's a TNG
that was my next question,
side
actually.
And a original series side, and we're trying to run them kind of concurrently. And so we're kind of cross-pollinating storylines and story ideas and stuff. So we're trying to keep them both moving ahead at the same speed.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother you're not even doing 3D chess, you're doing 4D chess at this point. I've been trying to convince our listeners. We got a Discord channel where they all hang out. We had to create a Star Trek quarantine zone because, as you know, when Star Trek fans start talking Star Trek, it drowns out everything else in the general chat. So we had to create a little corner where we could just go and vent out. And I've been trying to get them to board the Lexington and play through the 23rd century campaign, because we're going to stick with the USS Horizon in the 24th century and play through it. Season 2 confirmed. We're never going to stop playing this game. And I'd love if you, listener, go play that 23rd century thread. Tell us about it. I will work it into our game, and it'll be a lot of fun. Tell me about These Are the Voyages, the standalone book that you helped put together, and what you could expect if that's living campaign's too complicated. You don't want to do it. You don't want to sign up to a mailing list. You just want to buy a book and play games with your friends. What's the These Are the Voyages like?
So These Are the Voyages. That is the intention from the beginning of the game was to have an adventure book released at the same time as the core rule book, so that GMs and players had something that they could just start playing right away. And so there are 8 standalone adventures in These Are the Voyages. Those 8 adventures are each about 10,000 words long. So that means they're probably like 5-6 hours of gameplay depending on your group. They can all be played independently of each other, or you could probably string them together into a campaign if you wanted to. Some of them are specifically written to certain eras, but all of them include sidebars that talk about how you can adapt it for use in different eras. Like if you're playing an Enterprise campaign or a original series campaign or a next gen campaign, you can adapt all 8 adventures into whatever era you're playing in, for any ship, any crew. All that's agnostic. And there's 8 really cool adventures in there, running the gamut from investigating a missing Federation ship to looking for a planet with a forest and alien bugs and alien robots. I mean, just all kinds of cool Star Trek science fiction stuff in there. Really, really cool stuff. And that is the first of several volumes of missions. And also, there will also be standalone adventures released as PDFs. So you're going to see a big range of standalone adventures coming out in the coming months and years. That's
really relaxing for me because, as I mentioned, when we started, all I had was the PDF of the pre-release of the game, and so I was like, I'm going to write my own game. I've been doing Terrible Warriors for 5 years. I've done a bunch of these games. When we're doing Powered by Apocalypse, I'm improvising them. So, I mean, how hard could writing a Star Trek adventure be? And it's not just as simple as go on a quest. Because
there's more to it than
as soon as you find out from the Lifespan creator, these are the characters about the characters, and all of the missions have to be about the characters. And then when you start getting into it, how many hours did I spend on Memory Alpha making sure I wasn't using a name that was used somewhere else and getting my star dates right.
Conduit.
And let me tell you, Jim, back on our Discord channel, someone had a bone to pick with the person who wrote Convoy SE119. Because I read directly from the script, and I realized after I said it that it sounded wrong. When we got hit with the electromagnetic wave and we're dropped out into the trap and everyone's crippled and the pirates have yet to attack and we're going to do some science, I mentioned the ODN conduit had popped. And, I think a bunch of other inertial dampeners went down and people went flying. But someone picked up on ODN. ODN conduits? No, there are only ODN relays, and they're really just on Deep Space Nine, and you were meaning the EPS conduits, sir. And he picked it apart, and I went back, where the hell did I say that? I read it. Oh, I just read that right from Jim Johnson's own words. And I had to find the Memory Alpha page on ODN conduits. That's how it's a relay to communicate with the bridge and the Enterprise, and it's really like one of them, and it wouldn't explode. Maybe, I don't know. They're a relay of communication, not a power wire. And what are your thoughts on Star Trek technobabble?
We do the best we can, and we have a canon editor who helps us out, and we have CBS approvals. So if we get something wrong, we can always dodge it and say, you know what, CBS approved it, so let it go.
A lot of eyes looked at it before it got out, and they all passed.
I stand by that ODN conduits exploding from an electromagnetic burst still makes sense to me. And I mentioned that we had lost contact with engineering. So in the end, I was in reverse correct. But yeah, it was one of those things. I'd thrown in a fake orb of the Prophets, ended up being a bomb set by Romulans, which is like I hit all the wrong. I had Romulans as my bad guy, which is a cop out, and I throw in an orb, which is a cop out, and we're running off to Deep Space Nine, which is another cop out. But it was a lot of fun, and but I spent forever going through all the canon of the names of the orbs and how many there were, because I knew if we were going to play this game that there would be that one listener who'd be like, well, there's actually only 12 orbs if counting out the 13th one, and they're all named this and this, and you can't name it that because that was already found in this episode. So I had to come up with a cool orb name that didn't exist in any of the novels or the TV shows. And anyway, it's easy to stress out about. So kudos to you, who seems to, you did Convoy in 2 weeks, which is less time than I spent on our pilot. I'm going to call it that. We're behind on schedule, intentionally so, because one, I'm real lazy and it takes a while to get this show out, and two, I didn't want to spoil things for people who actually are playing along with the living campaigns. We're playing almost now 6 months removed from the releases. We're about to go into Tug of War, the one right after Convoy SC-119. And can you tease Joshua here on where some of the things that are going to be happening to our intrepid Commander Haddock, who may or may not be a war criminal at this point.
He did what he had to do to save the crew of the Mapool.
Yeah, he did what he had to save most. I mean, you saved
to save
captain.
some of them. I saved the captain.
I think you saved a handful
and a few other officers.
Warning. Give me 2 seconds because I got to pull it up because honestly we
got a million stories.
We released Tug of War I think back in September.
Yeah,
and that's an eternity in all the stuff that I've been working on for Star Trek Adventures. And so I'm just scanning it here really quick. It's not there's a little bit of reference to the growing meta plot. Oh, you're gonna have fun with this one. Now, of course, whatever happens with your character in terms of a court martial or whatever, hopefully he hangs around the ship long enough to get into this one. So basically, this is going to be a real challenge for your crew, and particularly, do you have a chief engineer player character?
We do when his schedule allows it, but he is down there. We just haven't had him in studio for a couple episodes.
You're gonna want the chief engineer to warm up their dice.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So Steve, you better get ready, man. And I hope those synthetic eyes of yours come in handy.
There you go.
All right, cool. Okay, so engineering problems abound. Jim, thank you so much for spending time with us and letting us know. For what we did in your campaign, I am truly sorry. We started. I think we named it colloquially
Bloodbath and Beyond.
Bloodbath and Beyond.
That's what we started calling it.
And but I think at the end, with the exception of the commander, our crew behaved exemplary.
Yeah.
They
I still argue the commander behaved exemplary, but yeah, he had to make some tough choices.
That's fair enough. And we're really looking forward to the rest of the living campaign.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to see what happens next. With the 2 more games that are out that we're going to be playing, and whatever happens next, and whatever weird stuff like our court martial that I'll be writing for myself. Mm-hmm. Star Trek does good courtroom drama.
It really does.
It does.
Jim, if someone is interested in submitting adventures to this open door policy that Modiphius has, where can they go to submit that? And the other thing I wanted to ask is, while you're on the air, do you have anything other than the obvious that you want to plug, something you're working on or writing that's coming out soon?
To pitch adventure ideas to me, just send me an email at jim@modiphius.com. That's MODIPHIUS.com. You can just send an email, say, hey, I heard you on this podcast and I want to pitch adventures. Let me know what I need, because I can send you the writer's guide and a sample pitch and just all the other information that you need. I'm also on Twitter at ScribeInetti, SCRIBEINETI. Websites, www.scribeinetti.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on all the. If you're
the links are in the show notes. I'll fill them up, all the links there of your website and where people can find you on Twitter and Facebook and the email.
But yeah, email me and I'll send you all the deets on how to submit. And then as far as plugging, I've got some fiction I'm working on. Nothing I want to plug, but I will say that Star Trek, we're going to be. We got the command source book that I was the lead writer on. And then the Beta Quadrant source book. Those are both coming out in the next couple months for pre-order. So get ready to enjoy those.
Commander Haddock can keep his command shirt until that book comes out. So he can actually use the new moves that come into it.
Yes.
One of the most beautiful rule books I've ever held in my hands, with the black background. I friggin' love it. It looks like the Elcars. All the in-world lore that's just peppered through. It's like the first 70 pages are entirely in character before you even get into the rules. It's all like, let me catch you up, Captain. It's one of the best written, immersive, fun. If you're not even a Star Trek fan, like our dear Captain Connell, not Commander Connell Haddock, but Connell Macbeth, Commander Captain Schofield. Our Joshua decided to name his player after the name of one of our players, so it makes everything wonderful.
It was with a K, though.
With a K. It's completely different on an audio podcast. And
it was one of the suggested names given for Betazoids.
And but if you're not a fan of Star Trek and you don't really know much about the world, but you got friends who are, this book is gonna it's a great crash course, not just in reading the history. Like you can go to Memory Alpha, but it reads like a wiki page because it is, and it's cold and academic and it's just the information. But the rule book here for Star Trek Adventures, it captured the spirit as well. Like it's not just talking about the Prime Directive, but it's then getting into logs from captains debating about how horrible it is to really uphold it some days, and the Ferengis making fun of them for having all this stuff, and it really captures all the different motivations and spirit and the discovery that goes into the Star Trek world. And I mean, even as a fan,
we're all very impressed.
Even as someone I mean, I don't remember a time in my life where I wasn't watching Star Trek. Going into this rule book, it was like coming home all over again. It was really, really a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, great. I'm so glad to hear you're enjoying it, because really, for me personally, this has been 26 years in the making, and I know a lot of the other guys or a lot of the other people on the development team, right? They're lifelong Star Trek fans, trying to develop the best RPG we can, and especially the best Star Trek RPG we can. Because I know it's been a long time since one's been out. I know Decipher's game came out like 15 years ago, and it's been a long drought for Star Trek gamers. So we're doing the best we can with it.
And it's an interesting when you see a licensed product come out, and this has changed recently. But there was a time where something that had a license attached to it. We played the Sailor Moon game that was printed in the 90s. It's awful, and you see that and you go, oh no, I really want to play a Star Trek game, but it might just be another game that they just painted Star Trek all over it. But when we sat down to play Adventures, it was the best case scenario. It was Star Trek. We have our captain who's never watched Star Trek, who's playing a character, but through the rules and the prompts and the creation of his character, he gets it, he understands it, and we're having to work together and solve problems that are unsolvable. And it really has been now 3 stories in a row, every time felt like a Star Trek show.
It did, yeah.
And that, I mean, that comes down to your writing, it comes down to the people who made the mechanics and the whole
Perhaps
shebang.
Except for the one moment where I blew out an airlock, because that felt more like FTL. But
I'm trying to think, though, of all the characters in Star Trek, the person that Haddock might really get along with is Janeway, because she would have blown out the airlock to save her crew if she had people who had boarded the Voyager, and they're coming down.
Yeah,
and
she was pretty badass.
You got a bunch of pirates coming down her hallway, and she's all alone, and her crew's back in the cargo bay. She'd hit that button and vent them into space.
Shep.
Yeah,
you know
she
what?
Absolutely would.
She's made decisions like that.
She has.
Yeah, to get her crew home, she's had to.
So you're just not in that desperate of a place. You got a brand anyway.
The Shackleton Expanse is pretty desperate. Anyway,
a debate for another debrief.
Yes.
Jim Johnson, thank you so much for your time and for your overtime. You stuck around a little longer than I asked. I really do appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and would love to come back and chat anytime about the Living Campaign or other parts of Star Trek or whatever. So thanks again. Thanks for supporting the game, and thanks for getting it. I'm so glad to hear fans actually get what we're trying to do and really enjoying it. So that is the most important takeaway for me, is that it sounds like we try to make a good Trek game, and mission accomplished.
Yeah, if it wasn't for bloodthirsty commanders, it would be completely authentic. And thank you for spending time with us, terrible listeners. I have been Justin Ecock, and I've been joined here by my side with
Joshua Barbeau.
Joshua Barbeau. I'm sorry for ever calling you Josh. I don't think I've ever said Josh in the credits. I think I just say that here when I'm around the table because
Normally,
feel so close to you.
I say my own name because you let your players introduce and out themselves.
Yeah, mostly because I've forgotten everyone at the table by the beginning because I'm so afraid half the time. This entire show is run off of adrenaline. Convoy SC119 is over. Patreon supporters, you can head over to our Patreon page where you can listen to the debrief on this episode, but you got a bonus interview with the guy who wrote it. That was really cool. And next week is Our Last Best Hope. A game about saving humanity from the brink of destruction. And we are your last best hope. And in fact, that is a game that had no GM. So we were all in it. And
in fact, if you enjoyed some of Connell Haddock's antics in this adventure, I dare say you will
Definitely
also enjoy Our Last Best Hope.
Yeah, it was me and Joshua and Bree and Adam and Brent, also from Star Trek Adventures, who we all played and were. We'll you know what? We'll save it for next week because I can't even pitch what the show was because we created it on the spot in the first episode.
there's going to be even more venting people into space.
Oh no, spoilers! Till next time, thanks for listening to the Terrible Warriors. Be good to each other.